classroom, you know? And you kids in the back, no guns. I'd like to welcome everybody here to the Florence Community Center for what we hoped would be a debate on the merits of the domestic partnership board.
I'm sorry, but your sound isn't on.
Why to the back?
Is it on now?
Can you just speak into it?
Sure. Okay, it's on now. I'd like to welcome you all here to the Florence Community Center for what we had hoped would be a debate on the merits of the domestic partnership ordinance. As everybody knows, that's on the ballot next week on Tuesday, November 7th. This is an ordinance that was passed by the City Council, and then folks that were not happy with the ordinance went out and got enough signatures to put it on a referendum ballot. We had hoped during the course of the campaign to have some community discussion and dialogue, and this was our attempt to have that happen. Unfortunately, Northampton for Traditional Values has decided not to be here tonight at this debate. So we've kind of transformed it into a forum. I'm Claire Higgins, I'm a city councilor at large, and to my left is Jonathan Wright, who is one of the co-chairs of the Northampton for Domestic Partnership Coalition. We will talk for not very long at all, and then we'd like you to ask us questions, any questions you have about the ordinance. When we get to the question and answer point, there is a microphone in the center of the room, and it'd be good if people could ask a question, and then let's sit down and then see if we can answer that question, and then there's some follow-up. We can go ahead and do that, but let's sort of try to do it in some kind of orderly fashion. I think I'm going to talk for a few minutes on some of the issues that have come up. I'm going to make sure I have the board. Yeah. Yeah,
I'm going to pick up a couple of the points
right
here that we wanted to talk about tonight, and then Claire's going to come back in a couple of minutes
right
and review the constitutional questions, the legal questions, and the questions of costs that have been raised in the course of the campaign. And thank you, Claire, and thank you all also for being here tonight. We're basically here to support the families and the children of this city in their quest, in our common quest for safe and loving homes. It's as simple as that. It's something that we need to do together. It's an idea whose time has come. We're also taking a stand against intolerance and bigotry wherever they appear, and they have appeared thinly disguised or not disguised at all in this campaign. And we need to stop that here. What needs to stop is not the gradual assimilation and the gradual acceptance of people from a variety of backgrounds with a variety of lifestyles. What needs to stop are the winds of hate and bigotry that come across this land. We need to stop them now. We need to stop them right at the city line, and that's what this ordinance is about. We look back, the process of change that our community has gone through in recent years has been dynamic and profound and bewildering to many of us. The process of change is not easy. Many of our downtown businesses have changed and been replaced by new businesses. We're very fortunate to have a vital and dynamic community, but it is changing and has been changing, and many in the community find this bewildering, and I sometimes share that sense of amazement. I think we can also look around at other cities and large towns throughout New England, and those which have not adapted and have not been blessed by the kind of people that we have in our community, what has befallen them in terms of economic decay and social decay as well. So I think we're very grateful, I certainly am, and those of us who live here in this community, for some of the changes that have come about and the strengthening of the community that has come about as a result. There are many stresses, though, in the process of this. The families with two working parents, the families with one working parent, the single parents. And all of these economic and social strains take their toll on families. And we're here tonight and in this campaign to preserve and strengthen the bonds between people, because this builds strong families. This is a pro-family ordinance. This is a pro-family organization. Make no mistake about it. Personally, I support marriage. And I've been married for 16 years. I have 3 children. Marriage is a wonderful thing. This campaign supports marriage, and people in it support marriage. Nothing in this campaign belittles or diminishes the magic and power of marriage in this society. Marriage is not available to all, and that is part of what this is about. Domestic partnership provides some basic recognition for the long-term commitments and the stability in a household. The opposition has raised the question of multiple domestic partners, and this is an oxymoron. It cannot be so. Under the ordinance, those taking this vow, entering into this relationship, are soul partners and life partners, many. The opposition is trying to use this tactic of fear of promiscuity, fear of disease, which has no basis in public discussion, certainly has no basis in this law, and has no basis in this community. So we need to be clear that this ordinance is not about that, does not promote that, and indeed, the process of recognition for families of all kinds strengthens the bonds of families. The opposition has raised another question out of context. They are suggesting that those who are unmarried, by the statistics, and by the way, I think it's Edmund Burke who said there are three kinds of lies, lies, damn lies, and statistics. But they have a statistic which they're circulating which indicates that there are far more unmarried people subject to restraining orders in the court system than married people. And I believe this is probably so. They have taken to calling these unmarried people domestic partners, and this is not so. The strains on unmarried people that lead to restraining orders have to do with, I'm sure, a range of issues. The depth of commitment, the strains on those units. We are not supporting here in this ordinance a process of forming of households willy-nilly. We are supporting the long-term commitment of people to each other in stable households. And that's what we're about. The domestic partnership ordinance does not offer the benefits of marriage. It is not marriage and does not offer anything near marriage. But underneath this discussion is a troubling notion, which is basically a philosophical one, which suggests that anything that multiplies or diversifies or adds dimension somehow diminishes marriage in itself. And this is not so. I basically think that those who enter into domestic partnership are people who revere long-term commitment and value family life. And the people that I have met in this campaign, and I have known people that I have known involved in long-term relationships, heterosexuals, gay and lesbian couples, have borne that out over the past decade. The question has been raised that there are special rights being offered here. The rights recognized in this ordinance are not special rights. These rights, these simple access to services, belong to the families of our city in their work to raise children and to care for each other. Decency and respect are not doled out by the right or the left or the majority or by a religious institution. They are the fundamental characteristic of being human. These rights belong to people, and they are being recognized now in this ordinance. Let's see, a couple of other points here.
Sure, go for it.
Taking a broader perspective for a moment, decency and respect for one another and caring for one another, creating a safe and secure city of diverse peoples and views is part of our heritage, and it's critical to our future. Many of you may know that the Underground Railroad, which is perhaps the greatest freedom conduit, the freedom pathway in the history of our country, perhaps in one of the greatest in the history of the world, passed by these windows here a little over 100 years ago. And the commitment to diversity and commitment to freedom of religion and freedom of practice and freedom of association and freedom of speech that have been a core value of this city for the last 140 years at least is certainly part of why we feel very honored in this community to be leading the way with this ordinance. Sojourner Truth made her home within earshot of where we are tonight. We are honoring those long traditions of openness. We ask the city to join with us in doing so. I would say to you that fear is a powerful tool, and it is being used effectively all around the world and in our community. But I believe that hope and courage are far stronger and will carry this message and community forward. And I ask you to have hope and courage and to vote. Claire.
Talk a little bit about some nuts and bolts that have come up. There's been some discussion about whether the City Council exceeded its allowable rights under the city charter, and I want to be clear that our understanding is that we have not, that we have researched this, and that our city charter would not allow us to obviously create an ordinance that broadens the range of marriage in the city. That would be a state right. We're not doing that. We're not saying that this is in any way replicates that. What we're doing is setting up a registry. We're allowing people to go in and register. We're not giving anything under that registry that's not already available through our rights under our own city charter or through rights that are in the state laws that can be accessed through the school system. We're very clear and very careful about that. So there have been some discussion that that right has been exceeded, but in fact, in all the research that's been done, and I know that there's at least one attorney in this room who's done some of that research and who may be able to answer this question further later, we have not exceeded that ability under our own charter. So, and I think that the City Council is pretty clear that we have the power under our charter and no more, no matter how much we would like to have more power. That's what we get. So we were pretty careful on that one. Now I'd like to talk about the cost question for a minute, because the cost question has come up a number of times. There is a cost associated in setting up a registry, obviously. There's paperwork cost. There's a staff time cost. That's why there's a fee attached to the registering of a partner. We are, as a city, allowed to assess a fee that covers the cost of implementation of something that we do. That's what we've done. We've come up with a fee in the ordinance. I think it's a $10 fee, which will cover the cost. And then there's also a fee if someone, for some reason, chooses to dissolve a partnership. It's clear in the ordinance that you cannot only register one partnership at a time, and that you have to pay if you're going to dissolve that, and you have to pay if you're going to register it. That fee is in accordance with what our ability is under law to charge fees. We cover the cost associated with setting up the registry. Now, the second set of costs that keep coming up are some unknown future cost that we don't know what it is yet, but it's going to be out there someday. And that could be health insurance, that could be any number of costs, but we don't know what they are yet. Well, I would say to you that we don't know the future cost of most of the actions that we take. We try to assess those future costs, but we don't know exactly what they're going to be. And a fear of future costs should not stop us from doing the right thing in the present. And if we look back over history, if we had worried about the fear of future costs when we give the women the right to vote, one of those future costs would have been having Mary Ford for mayor and me on the city council. People might have said, wait a second, you can't make a decision on future costs or risk based on what's the right thing to do in the present day. That's one of the points that's come up over and over again. Let me point out that insurance benefits are given through collective bargaining in the city, and not only collective bargaining through our bargaining units, but also through bargaining with health insurance companies. That's a long, complicated process. It's unclear whether or not the bargaining units have any interest in that at all. And if that happens, that would be looked at in the larger package of, is this something that the city could afford, just like any collective bargaining agreement is assessed on whether or not it's something the city can afford. Let me also point out to you that in the absence of a domestic partnership ordinance, many, many employers in our community are already giving those benefits. It's not necessary to have an ordinance in order to give those benefits. So that's kind of a bugaboo. We live in a really tough time right now. Everybody knows that money's tight in the city, and everybody knows that money's tight in their own pocket. And to bring up the cost issue is a way for people to say, well, you know what, I support it, but it's going to cost too much money. I really would strongly suggest that people decide based on the merits of the ordinance as written what their point of view is on it. And the last thing I'd like to say about the cost piece is that when the ordinance was written, there was a very clear decision made to leave the cost piece out of it in order for people to make a decision on the merits of the ordinance as it stands now, in order to not have to factor in whether or not this was going to cost folks money. Because that is a very hard decision. That's when our backs are all pushed to the wall about the right thing. It is the right thing, but it's going to cost me. Well, I can't guarantee that down the road this isn't going to cost, but I can guarantee that if Northampton votes yes, that we have done the right thing and that the cost will be assessed in the larger picture of the city budget in a responsible way. And I think what people will see over the last 2 years from the city council that they've had is that one thing we've tried to do is balance the city's budget in a responsible way and have been pretty tight on money. So I don't think we're willy-nilly spending money. I don't think there's anything else on that issue. That's an issue that comes up over and over again. I really would like people to think about whether or not that's a valid argument, or is that another way of feeling okay about saying no?
And can I just add something to that, Claire?
Yeah.
It's very, very clear and helpful. The ordinance in no way invites these additional benefits, doesn't make it any easier, doesn't change anything about that dynamic. It simply does something for some of our families. And we need to be coming back consistently to that affirmation. The cost thing is a red herring. It takes us off the main topic.
That's
this
right.
is about validating a variety of relationships that are the backbone of our vital and wonderful city.
Now, I also want to point out that in a couple of the ads that I've seen or the literature that I've seen, it's a pretty straightforward, will the ordinance cost employers money and benefits, including private employers? And the vote yes, vote no proponents are saying absolutely yes, it will cost other employers money. That's not true. Employers have the right to spend their money the way they want to spend their money. That's the way it works in this country. People spend their money the way they want. We don't, as a city, have a right to tell an employer anything. And if we look nationwide, the great debate on health insurance, et cetera, it's obvious that that's a debate that continues and will continue unabated. We don't have the right, and we certainly wouldn't try to take it to tell employers that they have to spend their money on private insurance benefits. They obviously have the right to confer anything they want on any of their employees. And I don't think I have anything more to say on that topic. Okay? Is there anything else that we think we're missing?
I think we want to join together here just a moment and thank the community as a whole for the support, the incredible hard work of the staff and all the volunteers, my co-chair Ruth Leuenberger, Elizabeth Silver, so many people who have worked incredibly hard on this campaign. We also want to thank the clergy and lay people of every major faith in this city who have supported this ordinance, making it clear that this is not an issue that needs to divide along religious lines. So, questions? So
why don't folks come up if they have a question and come to the microphone and you can say your piece. Anybody? There's a kind of a hush.
All over the world.
I see somebody actually on their feet, so.
Somebody who will always be Councilor Ames.
I'm Bill Ames, and I just wanted to say that I'm really disappointed that the opposition didn't take the trouble to send some people here so that we could have a discussion about issues that have been raised. And I think that's a real travesty of the democratic process, that we haven't been able to get together with them to ask them questions about their opposition to this, and to, on the other hand, to have their supporters ask you and me questions about our support of this proposal. Because one of the questions that I would address to those empty chairs that I wish were occupied by Dick Connolly or Chris Quadro or some one of the other officials of the Committee on Traditional Values is this: how do you see that an ordinance which grants adults the option or the opportunity of publicly confirming or stating their commitment to another person. I don't understand how allowing adults who consciously make a decision to confirm and to publicly state their commitment, how that in any way diminishes any other type of relationship, marriage, particularly in any way amongst younger people. And I'd like to ask them further that some persons who have a relationship and who want to take it perhaps further without going into marriage because of economic consequences that there can be. And on WHMP the other day, one of the members of NTV pointed out that he doubted that many older couples would forsake getting married for the loss of a few dollars of their benefits. And I would like to tell Mr. Ed Zukowski, I think it was, who made that statement, that those of us who are on pensions are very, very, very concerned about whether that pension is going to carry us through to the end of our days. And we're not out to lose any part of those economic benefits which we are due through our pensions, because that loss is a lifetime loss. And I think it's rather crass for someone to say that we'll forsake a few economic benefits, because economic benefits, economics is a driving force in all our lives. And I feel that I would like them to address that. And what is the problem with allowing people to publicly state through a domestic partnership ordinance their commitment to each other? I can't ask them, I don't want to ask you, because it's not a question for you. But I would ask you this, to make it a question at the end of all this.
Because I think the timer's almost.
Oh, the timer's on. Very quick question.
The egg is hard-boiled, right?
What is this hidden agenda
Oh, okay, the hidden
that
agenda.
there is out there? That's the end of the question.
That's a good question. Can I go? Oh, of course it was. We're going to diagram how we got to that question afterwards.
They don't teach diagramming sentences anymore, but if they did.
First, I'd like to go back to something else that you said about economics and families. I think that it's important for us to look at public policies that support families, and this is a small one we can do on a local level, but there are other ones on a state and national level that I feel that it's important to be supportive of. For instance, the marriage penalty in the tax code is a disincentive for people to get married. That's something we should be working against. The minimum wage at the appallingly low rate that it is means that families can't stay together. That's something we could work towards together. And the other place, we probably have common ground with them, independent of the city picking up the cost, is that families shouldn't separate because they can't get health insurance. Families shouldn't separate because of the sickness of someone they care about. And seniors shouldn't have to not do what they want to do in terms of a commitment because it penalizes them economically. But that's not the world we live in now. And those are national questions, not local questions. The second question is the hidden agenda. I've heard about the hidden agenda. I checked the back mail to see if the hidden agenda had been mailed to me, and I hadn't gotten it. There's been a lot of discussion about the hidden agenda, and there's been a lot of discussion about the militant homosexual agenda. And I am uncomfortable with that, first of all, because obviously I'm not on the mailing list, but secondly, because it presumes that people who are gay or lesbian are in lockstep politically around any number of things. Now, it's interesting, on this domestic partnership question, the gay Republicans in the Log Cabin Club are just as behind this kind of question as the gay Democrats or the gay anybody else. This isn't a militant homosexual agenda. This is a question of people wanting their lives recognized and affirmed. Now, if that's militant, so be it. But I don't think the Log Cabin Republicans like to think of themselves as militant. And Bob Dole was willing to take their money, so I think he probably doesn't think of them as militant either.
Once he made up his mind.
Right. I think the question about an agenda, there may be goals that people share, one of those being that relationship should be recognized. Nobody is giving marching orders from out of Northampton on this question of a militant agenda. So I think that's really important. This came from a group of people in the community. It was signed on to by the overwhelming majority of our city councilors, who, even if I had gotten the agenda in the mail, I'm not sure that any of them would have agreed with the agenda. So I think that's really important to put it in some perspective. And the other thing is that a lot of the information that Northampton for Traditional Values has put out has also come from other parts of the country, so that it's important to check sources on both sides. I think I can be very clear that the sources of this ordinance were local. I think that it's less clear that the sources of the information against the ordinance are so local.
One word which has been used quite a bit by the Northampton for Traditional Values group, or people writing letters in the paper against the ordinance, is the word lifestyle. Such phrases as gay lifestyle, or I'm paraphrasing here, but the idea that people want to impose their lifestyles on others, or have their lifestyles affirmed by the ordinance, and so on. I was just wondering if you'd ever given any thought to the word in its usage in this context, if you had any thoughts on that. If you don't, I do.
Lifestyle has a sort of, it sounds like fashion. And we're not talking about fashion when we're talking in terms of gay and lesbian populations. We're not talking about fashion. We're not talking about choices. We're talking about a range of circumstances that occur in human beings. And in our time, it's finally being recognized that this is not a deviant choice, but this is another way of affirming being a human being. And yes, I think you're right to identify the choice of the word lifestyle as being as diminishing the nature of this question, and as suggesting. We've seen in recent press reports some information, some old information misquoted coming out of the Colorado for Traditional Values group, suggesting, misquoting, I believe, some work of a California psychiatrist who in today's, one of today's local papers has clearly stated the truth around that issue. So, yeah, I think it's a good point.
I'd like to say that I like to think that I have a life, not a lifestyle. And sometimes I don't think I have a life, but most of the time I do.
Boy, does she have style.
Another question coming to the fore. And it's Tommy.
It's Tommy.
I always hate it when people get up and make a speech instead of asking a question, but it's going to
should've-
sound that way. Sorry, Councilor Ames. But the fact is, I do have questions for the people that aren't here that come specifically out of things that were referred to in the and I don't even want to call them the Traditional Values group, because I have plenty of traditional values, but the anti-group's flyer, that based on some things where I happen to just have some expertise in the job I do, are in error. And one of the values of debates is to find out, was this sentence written by, Mr. Conley or somebody, and did you have some data to support it? Because to the best of my knowledge, a number of things in here are in error. So if you'll let me mention them, and then maybe between now and the vote, somebody in the group would say if they don't think they're in error. The first one is an error of law, and Councilor Higgins pointed out that the council was very careful to observe the law. I want to make it clear that we have a city solicitor who reviews every ordinance, and that's one of the things they're there for, is just to catch us if we're really zealous locally and we write something that conflicts with anything on the books of the state or federal government. And this ordinance was thoroughly reviewed by that official lawyer for the city, and clearly she would not have let us bring forth an ordinance that somehow tried to rewrite marriage and family laws for the Commonwealth, and she would have pointed out that that was somebody else's prerogative. So we know that what was in that ordinance was locally allowable, because it was verified the same way every other law we passed. So we didn't rely only on the good judgment of the councilors. There's a legal error at the bottom of the first column, the column on the left of this brochure, saying the number of people in a domestic partnership is not limited. The domestic partnership ordinance that came across my desk and that I scrutinized very closely says you have to promise that there is nowhere a different domestic partnership or a legal marriage or anything else that would prevent you from registering this relationship that you are currently committed to. So that is a flat-out error of law, and I would like to ask the anti-group where they got that from. There's a couple errors of math. In 1972, there's a national group listed a set of demands to frame their agenda. This is also in the first column, from which they haven't deviated in the past 20 years. 20 years from 1972 is 3 years ago already. So I have a feeling that that sentence might have been written 3 years ago rather than by this group that's gotten together this year in Northampton. Otherwise, that's a math error. And another error that seems like it's either math or not knowing anything about employer benefit policies. That's one of the things I'm responsible for. And the right-hand column of this yellow brochure spends several paragraphs talking about why we should fight family leave legislation. It capitalizes family leave, and it says phrases like, if family leave is passed. Well, to the best of my knowledge, family leave was passed by the national government several months into the Clinton administration. And the city, as well as most other employers above, I think maybe 5 people or something, were told to extend unpaid leave for emergencies in the family to their employees. It was fought by employers nationally that there might be some cost, but it did pass. And it happened to have the little clause in it, which I think a lot of people didn't notice, but apparently the anti-groups 3 years ago, and we've messed up our history here, or they have, but they didn't want family leave to pass. They felt it was against families, and I think what they were hinging it on is the federal government actually gave the employer the option to define who qualified for that benefit and said that domestic partners could receive that benefit along with immediate family members as more typically defined. Now, that hasn't raised a lot of attention except anyone who's been in a personnel office in the last 3 years or runs a business or nonprofit organization does typically know that that did pass. So that's either an error of math or history or benefits policy. Another error of benefits policy that I found kind of amazing was to say that if family leave passes, the cost will go so high that they will be passed along to employees, and employees will find their wages may be frozen, and some employers will ask employees to pay more of their benefits. Now, fortunately, we've been able to avoid cutting back on benefits in the city. We have had years where we froze wages because of a budget crisis, and I believe this is happening among many employers in the last 5 years or so, 99% of which had never particularly passed any benefit extension. So I think that it's a gross misinterpretation to say that if your employer is asking you to pay 10% more of your health insurance, I mean, this isn't a great thing, but to say that happened because of all these benefit extensions is really kind of crazy. I don't know anyone in personnel administration who has seen some kind of cause and effect there. And the last thing I wanted to point out I see as errors just in general social policy statements. There's a quote, "It's well established that domestic partnerships are more unstable and avoidance of long-term commitment and responsibility is the tendency." I was taught when you say more something, you have to say then what. So I don't know what more unstable means, but I assume it means then legal marriage by most states' definition. And I just the other day came across that great statistic that still the divorce rate is more than 50% of the legal marriages. So the kind of social policy generalization of everything that's wrong with other ways of relating to people other than legal marriage makes a very poor and, in fact, an erroneous basis if this is an attempt to set social policy. And the last other error is that this agenda that we haven't seen is at the expense of women, children, the poor, and traditional families. And I submit to you that the city council that voted this ordinance has been outstanding in terms of its history of a council when we do take up social policies, which is not that often. Most typically they are social policies that benefit families and children and women and the poor. I can't see any place, in fact, anywhere in the country or any time in the history where this, quote, homosexual agenda came at the expense of those groups of people. So that would be my question for Mr. Connolly and Mr. Quadro. Where did the errors come from? Do they stand by those generalizations?
Thank you. Is there anybody else that has a question? You know, I don't know, I mean, I know that there's a lot of clapping going on, but I'm also hoping that there may be some people who need some information. And so if you need some information, now's the time to ask for the information. So, you know, if there's something that doesn't quite make sense, I know one thing that's come up is the fact that in the ordinance, we don't have a city jail or a city hospital, and that was a topic of discussion amongst us, and that is true that we currently don't. But the other thing to remember is that we have the county jail within the confines of our city, and we have the largest regional hospital within the confines of our city, and this can be guidance to them as they develop policies for use in their own institution. It expresses the will of the desires of the citizens in Northampton in terms of policies for those institutions, although we're not allowed to tell them what to do. So that was a question that came up, and I think was talked about quite a bit by counselors and others. And you know, there is a method to that madness, although it does seem awkward in the ordinance. Are there any other questions that people can think of that have come up that they've heard on the street, that they've wondered about?
I was just wondering on November 7th, after the domestic partnership ordinance passes, how long will it be till we can register as domestic partners?
Now, you know what? That is a good question. Let me think about that one. I would actually need to check that question with the city clerk, assuming that we have a passage of the ordinance on November 7th. I think we're going to need to confirm with the city clerk when she would be ready. We had an implementation date that was, I think, 60 days after the passage. And what happened when it went onto the ballot is basically that it was suspended. So my feeling would be that it would be reinstituted with the clock starting at that point. And 60 days following final adoption was to be the implementation in order to allow the city clerk to get her office in order to be able to implement. So I would assume 60 days after passage, although that's a question we're going to need to do a little research on.
I have a question. Some of the opponents of the ordinance have made statements that the domestic partnership ordinance would promote custody disputes and cause issues about custody of children among domestic partners. I was hoping you could respond to that.
I'm not an attorney, and I want to make that clear, but I think that this does not have anything to do with custody. This has to do with the relationship between two adults. It does not have to do with the relationship between the non-custodial parent and the child. What it does allow is for that non-custodial partner to go into the schools and be added onto the list for pickups and parent conferences and parent nights and so on. But that has no relevance, as far as I can tell, for the court when they decide a custody dispute. Custody law in this country is pretty fixed and pretty understood, and there's ways that courts go about doing that. And I don't think that this is going to interfere with that at all. And my hope would be that that not just this ordinance, but anything else we can do in terms of social policy would reduce the need for custody disputes in the court, not you know, it seems to be that the opposition to this ordinance has talked about all the lawsuits that could get filed. I think we should try to focus in this world on how we reduce, I'm sorry to all the attorneys, but how we reduce the number of legal disputes we get into. So I don't see that this is going to add any fuel to any custody fires. I don't, what do you think?
No, I think that's right. It's a non-issue. And as a distinguished attorney, would you agree with that?
Definitely, yes. There's no provisions that deal with custody in terms of the state of Massachusetts state law determines
Right.
custody and visitation. There's chapters of our law which provide for that. And non-parents who are not guardians of children and who have not adopted children have no standing to even bring custody claims of those children. And this ordinance clearly does not extend any rights to them that they don't otherwise have.
We would have exceeded our authority if we had done that. And for the lay people, my understanding, when you say they have no standing, it means if you go in and file some piece of paper with the court, they kick you out because you don't have any right to go in there and ask for
You
that.
don't end up standing up.
Right. Okay.
You're no longer standing.
Standing, right. You can't do it. Okay. Any other questions?
Or comments?
Well, huh?
No?
No?
No.
It's quiet.
Council President, final remarks? Great.
Do you want to?
I just want to say one thing.
Yes, please, Ruth.
As someone that's grown up in Northampton, a lot of what I'm hearing from people that I grew up with, as well as reading in the paper, is that Northampton has changed, and that you walk downtown and you don't recognize the people downtown, and somehow that's gotten attached to this ordinance, and I'm not sure how that happened or what the ordinance would have to do with that. Again, it may be related to some of the fear that people have, not only about our changing world, but about our changing sense of being people in this world. If Northampton, for traditional values, were here, I think they could see that a lot of us grew up here. A lot of us have lived here for many years, and I guess what I would want to clarify is that we are Northampton. Maybe we've only been here 20 years or 10 years, or like me, 42 years, but we are Northampton. Come downtown, recognize us, say hello to us. Let's be a community. A lot of people I know don't go downtown anymore, and I think that's a shame. I don't have as much time to go downtown as I used to, working as far away as I do. But when I do go downtown, I want to look at people. I want to know who my community people are and recognize people. I still know people in stores. They're not the same stores that I grew up with, but it's still my town, and I'm hoping that that message can somehow get across to the community that this is not about Northampton's changes. This is really about the people living in Northampton now and the benefits that these people would get from this ordinance. So, just a comment. I'm sorry I don't have a question.
I actually think that's a wonderful note to end on. I think that you put it just right, that this is about all of us who live in Northampton, whether we've lived here all our lives or whether we've moved here as adults, and about recognizing all the folks that live here that make it a wonderful community to live in. And there was a very touching letter in the paper today about not being able to go downtown and see folks that somebody knew, and that's hard when that kind of change happens, and there's an impulse to look for someone to blame when change makes you feel like the door has been shut in your face. But and maybe that's a message to a lot of us, that we need to be more open and welcoming to everyone in the community, that there are some folks that do feel left out. But this ordinance is not the cause of that fear or that feeling of being left out. And I'm really glad that you said that. So,
one of the characteristics of Northampton, as long as I've been here, which is 24 years, is a sense of openness and welcoming. And that's one of our great traditional values. It's a wonderful tradition. It's strong and it's live and well, whether you've lived here all your life or for a couple of decades. And I'd just like to pause and be grateful for that and realize that we all celebrate the nature of this community and enjoy it and revere it. And that's something we do regardless of our political stances and regardless of our range of beliefs, that this is an extraordinary place to live. And as Dan Yakuzo said recently, there's no magic, it's the people.
Could I remind folks that the polls are open on Tuesday, November 7th. They open at 7 in the morning and they close 8 at night. And that we have been videotaped, and this will air on NCTV, Northampton Cable, 7:30 on Sunday, November 5th. If you hear this announcement, you have already seen the show. But now you know. Just occurred to me as I was saying. I really appreciate everybody turning out here tonight, and we'll move forward to the election. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.